Special thanks to Fanatical for partnering with me to deliver all of you a discount on Metal Gear Solid Delta. PC players can use my link to get MGS Delta for 25% off on Steam. Check the link in the description for more info. Now we can get on to your regularly scheduled program. Well, folks, it's been a long time coming, but the Metal Gear Solid franchise is officially back with its first new entry in a decade. For those new to the series, the basic rundown goes like this. Metal Gear has been around for almost 40 years, since the original debuted on the MSX2 in 1987, releasing 4 titles in the 8-bit era of gaming. It took a bit of a hiatus and then came back in 1998 with Metal Gear Solid, which revolutionized storytelling and visuals and stealth action gameplay. That's when the series became the juggernaut it is today. Sequels upon sequels, spin-offs upon spin-offs, console games, handheld games, remakes, the works. The series had near constant output between 1998 and 2015 when Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain came out. This was a more controversial entry in this series, satisfying most players with its incredible stealth action gameplay, but disappointing fans with its story taking a backseat to the gameplay, which was not a usual thing in the Metal Gear series. Especially since this game, as the so-called final piece of the puzzle between the prequels and sequels, left more questions than answers. But for what it's worth, I think The Phantom Pain is one of the most fun games ever made, and that's good enough for me. But that game saw series creator Hideo Kojima and series owner and publisher Konami parting ways, Kojima going to take his team and doing new projects, which led to the Death Stranding series. Meanwhile, Konami decided to pull out of the AAA console gaming market entirely. The only Metal Gear game to be released after Phantom Pain was Metal Gear Survive, which I never played, and from what I gathered, the title didn't do much to impress people and looked, to fans, as though it was a cash grab with the Metal Gear name attached to it. But in recent years, Konami has decided to return to the console gaming market, giving us collections of their classic titles on modern platforms, including Metal Gear with the Master Collection from 2023 that came with Metal Gear, Metal Gear 2, their NES counterparts, Metal Gear Solid 1, and its expansions like Metal Gear Solid Integral and Metal Gear Solid VR Missions, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3. It was a lot for one collection. Konami has also invested in bringing their classic IPs to the modern era, first by remaking Silent Hill 2 for modern consoles, and now they've remade Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, the PS2 classic, as Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, a natural jumping-on point for new fans who are interested but don't really play old games. MGS3 was the first game in the series chronologically, detailing how series antagonist, Big Boss, became the way he was by showing him at a younger point in 1964 when he was an agent working for the Fox unit on his first mission. Back then, he had the codename Naked Snake and was tasked with entering Selinoyarsk to extract Russian scientist Sokolov as he wishes to defect to the United States to avoid his research and weapons falling into the hands of the evil Colonel Volgin, who wants to use his ultimate weapon, the Shagohod, to threaten the whole world. Snake's mentor, the Boss, joins Volgin's side, and so Snake has to fight to defeat both Volgin and the Boss and destroy the Shagohod. If you haven't played MGS3 before, that's all you really need to know to have a spoiler-free experience. MGS3's story is iconic for it being emotional and intense as loyalties are tested and Snake is pitted against extreme circumstances that get you to understand why he became the person he did later in life when he fought the series' protagonist, Solid Snake, in the early games. For this video, I figured I'd start by giving my spoiler-free thoughts on Delta as a game on its own and then get into more specifics on how I felt about the game as a remake of the original. For those who don't know, MGS3 is a game I am quite familiar with. It is among my favorite games ever made and has been that way since I first played it almost a decade ago. My thoughts on it have evolved a lot in that time, especially when I pretty much devoted all my free time to playing and replaying and mastering it a few years back. But even though I'm not the Metal Gear fan I used to be, MGS3 still stands tall as an excellent gaming experience. My recent video details all of that. So when a remake was first announced, I was like, oh man, is this gonna be any good? MGS3 is a very detailed game, and I wasn't sure if a new team could fully capture that magic and ensure all the weird detailed stuff from the original game made the cut. I made a video saying that when Delta was first announced. I feel like I had a reason to be skeptical. I mean, we got an MGS1 remake back in the 2000s when Kojima was still very much involved with the series, and it still turned out to be a game that a lot of people were mixed on. Could Delta live up to the original MGS3? I wasn't sure. But the more I saw, the more I felt like the team really cared about delivering a great product, and I decided I'd give it a chance and hope it was the great, faithful modernization of MGS3 that it promised to be. And now, over 2 years later, the game is finally out and I've played it and can weigh in. Like I said, I'll start with my spoiler-free thoughts. While I know it's easy for me to be lost in the hype of a new game, having said that, my spoiler-free review of Delta is simply this. If you like cool action shooter games, or like stealth games, or anything that MGS falls under the category of, buy this fucking game. It was a blast. I have played MGS3 more times than a mortal probably should, but I was lost in the remake anyway. It is a sick game with a lot of detail and fun content and great controls and improvements over the original experience, and makes changes to balance the game out. If you're looking for a good game to play as a fan, non-fan, or something in between, this game will scratch the itch and is more than worth paying full price for. I have heard by watching the Digital Foundry video that the game is having some Unreal Engine 5 performance issues on console, but on PC, I had a pretty rock solid experience. Fast loading, 4K 60 FPS gameplay, and so on. Guess score another point for being a PC gamer. But let's begin with the obvious thing any longtime fan would wonder after watching the footage. How does Delta control? While I have simply referred to the game in the past as an MGS5 styled remake of MGS3, that's not technically how it handles. I did notice that Delta borrowed many animations from the Phantom Pain, but you can't sprint or dive or roll around or combo CQC guys and other things you could do in MGS5 because those kind of mechanics don't belong in MGS3's levels. It's more like Delta is a contemporary action game adaptation of the gameplay in MGS3. Like, it has the standard third-person over-the-shoulder aiming, but you can also switch to the first-person aiming of the original game. The button layout is also very different from any previous Metal Gear game. Like how the left and right D-pad buttons are how you look at your weapons and items instead of L2 and R2, since those buttons are now used for aiming and shooting. Looking at the default button layout, I knew I was going to need to make some changes. The X button, for example, is not how you crouch and crawl by default, so I changed it to be like the other games. MGS5 in particular. So I made X crouch and crawl, I made square the roll, like the MGS5 dive, and triangle the action button and circle the reload button. I thought this was a comfortable setup, although it did take a lot of time for me to become used to it since I have so much muscle memory from the original game and that's where many of my early deaths came from. But I don't think any person who hasn't played MGS3 before would ever struggle with it. It's very intuitive if you've played any contemporary third-person action game. The name of the game in MGS3 is stealth action, yes, but also surviving in a harsh environment by managing your stamina with food you find in the wild or keeping out of sight by wearing different camouflage. All those systems are faithfully implemented in Delta with improvements I can get into in a second. Also, straight out of the box, you have the Snake vs. Monkey mode, which was originally a collab between MGS3 and Ape Escape 3 on PlayStation 2, and now that mode is back for PlayStation players and was also on the PC version as well. But then they also came up with a Bomberman MGS crossover for the Xbox version, and there's going to be an online mode pretty soon. Combine all that with top-of-the-line visuals and you have a really great experience. The graphics look superb in this game. It takes the original MGS3's attempt at realism by PS2 standards and brings it up to the modern day, offering realistic lighting and models for every environment and character. I played with the default visual setting for my first playthrough to see what the artists behind Delta were able to offer, and I got really immersed in the world. I've seen this setting 1,000 times, but Delta managed to breathe new life into it with the realistic vibes. Rain and mud and other details just felt near lifelike. The close-up shots in the cutscenes really get you to see every pore on the boss's face, for example. The only time I was taken out of the experience were 2 specific animations and 1 scene. Snake doesn't rail hop in the remake, you get this janky looking maneuver, and he doesn't flip over this branch anymore. He doesn't need to, but it looked cool. And then the textures were freaking out in this scene, but that was probably a PC only thing. And I have to show this part where they poorly spliced some audio together for some new tutorial lines in the beginning of the game. Like, I was laughing at this forever. It sounded like a 2000s YouTube poop.
Your available weapons will be displayed in a list on the screen.
Like, even the 3DS version re-recorded that line. But I was just talking about the graphics being good a moment ago, so I'll go back to that. The attention to detail is all over the game. Like, if you get muddy right before a cutscene, you'll be muddy in the cutscene. Battle damage sustained throughout the game will remain on Snake from start to finish, so he'll look slightly different for every player. Those are the kind of things that make a game feel alive. The kinds of extra mile the devs can go when given the time to think through all the little details. And that's basically all I really wanted to say for the spoiler-free talk. Not that there is much to spoil for this 20-year-old game, but if you don't know MGS3 or want to experience the remake blind, I figured I'd be vague at the beginning. I think Delta is well worth the money. The game offered a decent challenge, has a lot of content, and is just really well made, and I'd recommend that to anyone who likes video games. I feel like you're bound to have a great time with it. So now, I can get into my thoughts on it as an MGS3 veteran. As I've been saying, MGS3 is a really weird game with a lot of tiny details that make it what it is. This is a game where you can trick enemies with fake death pills and revive yourself to get the drop on them. A game where you can poison enemies with trapped snakes. A game where you can put people to sleep with gas spray and defeat a boss fight by accelerating the system clock 2 weeks so that he dies of old age. A game where you can non-lethal kill a boss fight by using stun grenades and then an AK on him. The list goes on from there. There are no games quite like MGS3. So when MGSD was announced, that's the main thing that had me curious more than anything else. I assumed it was going to be a ground-up remake like the Resident Evil games and wondered if Delta could ever come close to the kind of detail and charm contained within the original MGS3. I can happily confirm that Delta really nails it. Delta is what you'd call a shot-for-shot remake. The levels, items, and item placements are exactly as they were in the original game. And so, the weird stuff is almost all here and accounted for. The croc cap, it's still in the game, and now you can wear the croc camo to maximize the effect. The fake death pills are still fun to toy around with. You can still trick Colonel Volgin with the Rykov mask. You can still kill the end early with the system clock. You can kill him early with the sniper rifle and battle the Ocelot unit in his place. You can still weaken your enemies by blowing up their food and weapons, and so on and so forth. All the odd things that made MGS3's world come to life in a way no other Metal Gear game, or just game in general, can compare to, is all here in Delta. Except that glitch where you can get an easy kill on the Fear. That was kind of disappointing, however, I accept it because it is a little too easy to do. I can see why that was left on the cutting room floor. I never even knew if it was intentional or not, but I guess the designers on Delta considered it a glitch and left it out. I was very impressed with how Delta kept the unique identity of MGS3 while also adding in detailed design ideas of their own, like the battle damage or sustained mud things I was just going into. It is taking the detailed world of MGS3 and bringing it to life in the modern age and using new hardware to add more to it, which is great. One thing I was praying for was that Delta was going to use the benefit of hindsight and new hardware to improve areas of the original that were lacking. MGS3, despite being a masterpiece, did have some shortcomings that weren't really possible for the devs to do anything about on the PS2. For example, all aspects of survival were tied to this menu called the Survival Viewer. This is where Snake changes camo, eats food to keep stamina up, and decides what weapons will be on the quick select. The problem was that every option in the menu took like 2 seconds to load. And it's not really a long time, but it does add up over the course of your playthrough. The Survival Viewer is a really pace-breaking element of MGS3, so I tend to avoid it unless I absolutely need to use it. Probably one of the many reasons I usually stick to non-lethal runs of MGS3. It made it so that my time healing or switching weapons in the menu is pretty non-existent since I use one weapon for most of the game and thus don't get into combat a lot. But the question was, how does Delta improve? The answer is by not replacing the systems of the game, just by making them faster. I said in an earlier video that newer games like Zelda Breath of the Wild show us how pausing the game to go to the menu isn't a game breaker when the loading's pretty fast. MGS Delta makes one very small change to the Survival Viewer that I liked. When you go into it, the music and background noise continue. This makes it feel like a natural extension of the gameplay, instead of it being a thing where all the action stops dead so you can go into the menu. As stated, this is a really tiny change, but one that has an impact on your brain in the heat of the moment. But then, changing menus is quick and snappy, and I really like that. That goes for everything from camo to food to weapons, but then by pressing up on the D-pad you get a quick select list of your most recent camo choices. If you want to do a more detailed configuration, you can go into the menu, but if you quickly want to swap between some of your favorites, then they're right there in this quick swap and the transition is almost instant. This is a pretty fantastic addition, greatly benefits the pace of the game. Another thing that was pretty clunky about MGS3 was the new CQC mechanics. When you knew what you were doing, the CQC slam was very satisfying, but then figuring out how to do the slam and the grab was just kinda awkward for new MGS3 players. Even worse was the interrogation mechanic where you needed to press the stick to do it, but this would often unintentionally cause you to kill the guy since that was also the stab button. In Delta, you get a prompt to do CQC and a list of buttons that tell you what does what, similar to MGS5. Now interrogation and the slam and the stab are all very intuitive. Plus, the animations they added of Snake countering enemy attacks look really sick and make CQC and gameplay feel like the cutscenes. So Delta improved every issue I had with the original. So you might be wondering, well, what's the catch? What's the downside? To that, I have to be honest, I didn't feel like there were any when considering Delta as a gameplay experience. I only bring that up because the only other remake in the Metal Gear series was the Twin Snakes, the 2004 remake of MGS1. I mentioned this game earlier and said how the reception to it was more mixed because of how it took the gameplay of MGS2 and dumped it into the world of MGS1, leading to a very unbalanced game. Enemies were tougher than the original for sure, but Snake was just too powerful now and the abilities he has were not intended at all by the original level designers. That was a case where things really needed to be adjusted to ensure proper game balance. Since Delta was also a shot-for-shot remake of the original with modern game mechanics, I wondered how the two would compare. And as more footage came out, I wasn't super worried, and that lack of worry was validated by the final product. Here's why. The leap in gameplay between MGS3 and 5 feels less vast than MGS1 and 2. Obviously, Phantom Pain and Snake Eater play very differently, but my point is that Snake Eater already had mechanics akin to what modern games have in them. Like, there's nothing that Snake can do in Delta that would outrageously break the game if it were in the original. Like, MGS3's run-and-gun gameplay is pretty compatible with a third-person shooter setup. It wasn't how the original handled, but it doesn't feel out of place in the original's world. And I also already went over how abilities that Snake had in the Phantom Pain that would be out of place in Snake Eater are not in Delta, like sprinting or the leg sweep from the ground. So the level design remaining unaltered works just fine in Delta because the designers went about it really carefully. But even then, I would say the most important aspect of Delta in this conversation was something I didn't even see coming at all. I found myself regularly challenged by this game. I was low-key expecting this game to be on the easier side for me since this is how many runs of MGS3 I did on PS3 alone. I have experience with this title to say the least, so I played Delta on hard mode to see what was what with this game, and I got my keister kicked pretty often. I didn't even have a lot of food at various moments and also found myself running out of stamina meter more often than I did in the original. But one of the best ways to demonstrate new challenge is with the Mark 22 Sleep Dart gun. This gun was actually given a very important and subtle nerf. In the original game, the Mark 22 is basically a sniper rifle. I spent like a minute explaining how in my recent MGS3 video. If you lined the enemy up with the ridge at the end of the barrel, that was a guaranteed headshot and they'd be down in a second. It was very cool and satisfying. But Delta doesn't let you do that. The Mark 22 has a bullet drop mechanic, something many games have implemented in recent years, where a bullet will lose altitude the further away it goes. The Mark 22 was a straight shot in the original. Here it will fall to the ground, so you can either aim in third person and try to land headshots by calculating where the bullet's going to drop so it hits the enemy's head, or you can try your luck in first person. But that instant headshot method I just went over does not work anymore. For me, that was almost like I was playing a new game. To deal with this increased tension, there were moments where I was like, fuck it, I need to go John Wick to survive against the relentless enemies. I mowed down like 200 guys by the end of this game when I often killed 10 dudes or less when playing the OG game. The button mapping of the weapon select also made it harder to do the rapid fire shot with the Mark 22, even if it's technically possible. But thankfully, tactical reloads are back, that really helps. To test out if I was crazy or not, I decided to load the game up on Legacy mode. When starting, you pick between New Style and Legacy Style. New Style is the game I've been talking about thus far. Legacy Style gives the game a filter where the graphics are more vibrant like the original game, when the New Style is strictly realistic lighting and colors. You can use this filter when playing a New Style, which I probably will in future runs of Delta, but then, the Legacy gameplay mode is meant to reflect the original experience. And not the subsistence version with the free camera, I'm talking the original PS2 Snake Eater from 2004 with the fixed overhead camera. You can only rely on stationary first-person aiming in this mode. In Legacy Style, they removed the bullet drop from the Mark 22, so you can still get those easy headshots like the OG game in this. So I was glad to confirm it was not a skill issue, they actually sought to rebalance this weapon for New Style, and that really impressed me. The way the designers handled the battles against Vulcan and the boss also really impressed me too. All the bosses felt pretty immune to the cheese tactics I've worked into my playthrough of the OG game, like when I mentioned about the Fear earlier, or how I didn't do the rapid fire thing against the Fury anymore. But then Vulcan in the OG was a tough, non-lethal kill, but fun when you realize that you can CQC him while he's firing electricity at you if you're close enough, and then dodge rolling into him to do additional damage. The Delta fight brought me back to years ago when I was first really learning that fight. The glitchier stuff doesn't really work anymore, so you had to dodge the lightning or tank the damage, using everything in my disposal to get that non-lethal kill at the end, like the fake death pill or the Rykov mask. It was pretty cathartic. The boss was also a puzzle box. This boss was made more like the cutscenes because the boss will fly around the arena at breakneck speed and will dash towards you at lightning speed. So when she's like, get ready, I was always like, oh crap. And we need to quickly unequip my gun because they added a fantastic idea to this boss fight where she'll pull your gun out of your hand and throw it and your ammo away. Another thing that made that fight feel more like the cutscenes. CQCing the boss came down to using the punch button with the right timing when she gets close, and that was also pretty satisfying. But I discovered that by complete accident. The game doesn't even give you a tell for that, unlike the original game, which put the exclamation mark over her head. So I died to Vulcan and the boss many times before defeating Delta and ending the game. Which only leaves the story, and there isn't a whole lot to say. Delta is exactly the same as the original. It uses the same voiceover and motion capture from 2004. Konami is certainly capable of redoing that stuff since they did for the Silent Hill 2 remake, but I'd imagine for MGS they'll be more costly process since these games have about 1,000 pages of script per each one. So reusing it is fine, especially since the motion capture and cinematography and voice acting hold up really well. You don't really get a lot of action scenes like these in newer games, or really any other games besides the Metal Gear ones. Another reason why it was probably on the safer side to reuse the cutscenes is that the Twin Snakes did redo all the scenes in voiceover. A product of necessity given the original game not having motion capture data, but the voice acting and cutscenes were almost universally worse because everyone is doing a stale impression of themselves from the original game. And the new cutscene music, or lack thereof, really bogged down the scenes, when the music was one of the most iconic parts of the original. Delta reusing the scenes eliminates that problem. And the cutscenes were given improved facial animation with extra detail and English lip sync. Plus, the scenes were given more realistic sound design, removing many of the sound effects which were cartoony by today's standards. So it's not like it was a copy-paste, but that does mean I don't have much else to say on the story that I didn't say in my video on MGS3 from a few weeks back. Basically, I think it's held up great because of the focus on characters and their dynamics. Heinous villains like Volgin make for entertaining scenes. Spies and their conflicting motives make for good drama. The boss is a fascinating character with a tragic role in the Metal Gear saga. But I do wish her backstory with Snake was explored on screen more to make the scenes feel more emotional between them. And I think the virtuous mission at the beginning overwhelms players with too much information and not enough gameplay to back it up. So it's a really slow opening to an otherwise exciting action game. But if you love the story in all its aspects, then Delta preserves it how you remembered it, but slightly improved. When I started playing the game, I felt like the more dramatic or cartoony voices felt a little weird with photorealistic graphics, as a game like MGS5 really toned down the cartoony elements of the acting because of that realism, but you get used to it pretty quick, so it didn't bother me much past the opening hour. So no matter which version of the story you played, I thought the scenes worked and were immersive when they were at their best. And found the ending emotional still, even after seeing this a million times. They even made Big Boss's tears more emphasized, and that got me, have to say. But as the credits started rolling on MGS Delta, my mind was wandering to the bigger questions. It was pretty clear to me in less than 2 hours that MGS Delta was a fantastic gameplay experience. It took an all-time great game and made it feel like a modern title. But is that enough? That's the question that can only be answered by each player individually. Remakes are scrutinized in a way original games never would be, because Delta has an original work to compare it to. The more I played of Delta, I was thinking, this is awesome, I love this game. But then I was like, well, yeah, of course I love this game. It's MGS3, a game I already love from over 20 years ago. If MGS Delta wasn't a fun game, then I'd have to consider it a major fuck-up because it's a shot-for-shot remake of a game that already exists and most everyone agrees is good. If you like or love MGS3, there's no reason why you wouldn't like Delta, and if the flaws of MGS3 hindered your ability to enjoy it, then Delta fixes those things, so I can't imagine people not liking this game. It does pretty much everything right. But by being so faithful, it just got me wondering what Delta's place in the gaming world is going to be long term, you know? For right now, it is a great game, well worth your time if you like great games. But then, could I really say it's better than MGS3? It has less flaws than MGS3, technically speaking, but then MGS3 was a revolutionary work that has stood the test of time. MGSD is a fun refresh on that game. Shot-for-shot remakes tend to prove what people already knew, that good games are good and nostalgia makes money. MGS Delta is the kind of remake that can stand alongside the original and make you think, yeah, that was a great time, just like the original. But I do just feel like it doesn't really offer anything new, you know? For some, that's fine. Hell, for me, that's fine. I'm happy having two versions of an amazing game. I'm sure I'll revisit both in the future, and it wouldn't stop me from recommending Delta to anyone. I'm instead just speaking in a philosophical manner about gaming remakes in general. A good game to compare Delta to would be Resident Evil 4. Both these remakes are based on PS2 era classics that changed the industry, but part of what makes the RE4 remake special to me, as someone who has over 100 hours of playtime in the original, is that the remake is familiar to anyone who played the original, but the RE4 remake is a new take on classic material. Both are about a highly trained agent on a mission to rescue the president's daughter from a cult, but one of them is a campy thrill ride spy movie with tense combat from your limited movement, and the other is a more serious take on that idea that explores trauma and regret by focusing on how Leon's experience in RE2 affects him to this day, when the original kind of brushed that aside. Doing all that in a game with greatly expanded combat and exploration and stealth and all that good shit, the differences make both experiences I could see coexisting throughout future generations of gaming. When with something like Delta, which is just the original in most every way, I can see some people replacing MGS3 in their mind with Delta. I can see other people not remembering it as much. Kinda like how the Twin Snakes has been a bit forgotten about since it was largely left behind by the series, MGS1 being the version that continues to get ported to everything. Delta being much better executed than Twin Snakes while still not being a radically new take on the material like an RE4 just has me wondering what Delta's place in the series is going to be in the future. But for now, it is a great reintroduction to the Metal Gear series for a modern gaming audience, and if people really resonate with it, it will have done its job. But then, are we going to remake MGS1 next? Remake MGS2? Remake Peace Walker? Maybe it'll be like Resident Evil and we'll get a new game every now and again and then remakes. Only time will tell. I feel like a way to do something nostalgic while also doing something new would be remaking Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. That way, we can take stories that already exist and expand upon them with new ideas that work in lore from later in the series, making those games feel more like a cohesive part of the whole saga and not the archaic games most people tend to skip over. Not that they should, but it is how those games are treated despite being the debut of Solid Snake and the end of Big Boss and all those other really important things. I feel like remaking those games would still be working within the story people already like with characters we already like, while also letting the team surprise us with new gameplay and level ideas that can find a way to still feel new. And maybe we'd get cool spin-offs like another MGR alongside them. That's what I'd want them to do with the series in the immediate future, but that's just me. If you have thoughts on how Delta turned out, or how you want the series to go forward from here, let me know in the comments below. That's about all the time we have for today, so I'll close the video by announcing that next up is MGS4, and then my big MGS final project, and that'll be it for the Metal Gear Revisited series. Until that time comes, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.